Right. So where there is no fiber system, you want the commission to compel adherence to a set of service quality standards to assure that all the customers get their basic adequate service. That's what you want.
Absolutely, and we want strengthened service quality standards.
Right.
Yes, you've got it.
Yeah.
They know how to do that.
Yes, the idea that there should be a bunch of standards for 5% of the customers and the other 95% are in some competitive scenario, and therefore they could choose Cablevision or they could choose Time Warner Cable to go to have a different kind of phone, but you still have the same situation when you look at the consumer satisfaction surveys for Time Warner. You see major problems indicating that, so maybe it's just cable TV or maybe it's cable TV and phone with them, Time Warner, but the same standards as to trouble, the customer 24 hours they're out, why shouldn't Time Warner Cable or Cablevision or anybody else, Frontier, all the telecommunications companies, when they are providing the phone service, whoever may be providing the phone service should have the same standards available or required for their customers.
Absolutely.
And whether it was Verizon's employees or Time Warner Cable's employees or anybody else's, they would be required to maintain the network and the service.
Absolutely, and let me add another piece to that. There need to be meaningful penalties for failure to meet those standards. In the competitive framework that we operate in right now in terms of a lot of deregulation, we don't have a monopoly anymore in which there can be the kind of regulation of capital investment that one was able to impose in a period of a monopolist. One of the things that can serve as the stick, I'll call it, to fiber expansion is if there are meaningful penalties for de facto abandonment of the copper plant. So that if Verizon is in effect, as you can see from these pictures we heard from those of you who are still here and your colleagues, if Verizon is failing to provide the statutory obligation of service to every customer, but that its lack of maintenance and repair amounts to de facto abandonment, there should be significant penalties. And at that point, one would hope that in some areas Verizon would say, rather than eat these penalties and do the repair of the copper, we will expand the fiber and put in the world-class service. So that's one tool. It's not sufficient. It's at the margins, but it is one tool. But you're absolutely right. And I think you began to ask questions about it of the PSC, given now that the FCC has reclassified broadband as a telecommunications service. How does that now open the door to the kind of legislative and regulatory oversight that would create requirements on Verizon to expand its fiber build-out?
Hi there. Thank you for your testimony. Earlier, I had asked some questions about the ability to get a human being on the phone in terms of support and some questions about what the staffing levels were there, and also asked some questions about the staffing levels for responding to repair calls and whatnot, and just your sense of the numbers on the trend lines on those two things. And these are things I do get complaints from folks about both categories, and especially the difficulty of getting a human being on the line to even initiate a straightforward communication regarding a complaint.
You can imagine how frustrating it is once a customer finally does get a human being on the line, because yes, Verizon puts up a lot of barriers because they don't want you to reach a person. If you're a low revenue customer, they just assume that you get frustrated and leave. But once you finally do reach a customer service rep or a repair bureau person, how frustrating it is for our members then to have to then apologize for the policies of their employer that have made it difficult for them to provide good service. That's on the call center side. To have to apologize for having their calls sent overseas to be answered by somebody who does not know the situation in the United States, who's trying to do a good job. I have nothing against people overseas trying to make a good living. But to be sending our calls overseas in a way that does not provide the quality service, how frustrating it is to our members in the call centers and repair bureaus. And I can tell you as well, for our technicians, I hear this, I'm not on the front line, Kathy has been, how frustrating. A lot of the pictures you saw, people will go back and say, that cable needs to be replaced, that crossbox needs to be attached, that pole is too far. And their supervisors will say, we don't have the budget, we don't have the time, just do a quick fix. And you know how frustrating it is to people whose livelihood is designed to try and do their job right. So thank you very, very much for holding this
Let me
hearing.
just ask you one more question. Have you had a chance to review the PSC order on the Time Warner Cable merger with the new charter? Or are you familiar with it at all?
I've only heard the high level that was reported to you today. I have, for CWA, reviewed and participated in dozens of merger reviews, so I'm very familiar with the kinds of issues that I hear have been part of the requirement. And it seems to me that one of the pieces that I didn't hear from many of the answers is when you have two companies that are merging, like Time Warner and Charter, they are realizing efficiencies that should be shared with the public. And so these kind of conditions that serve the public interest are one of the ways in which the higher levels of revenue, profitability that come from the efficiencies of the merger get shared with those people who are actually using the service.
Right. Is CWA participating in the Altrice proceeding?
We are deeply involved in the Altice proceeding, both here in New York. The discovery is ongoing. I am not personally involved in New York. I'm personally very involved at the FCC and aware of it. I can report to you that the discovery is going very slowly, and the discovery is critical because we have gotten a great deal. This is a foreign company, a Netherlands-based company that is buying Cablevision and has been gobbling up companies in Europe and other places. After they bought Numérique Cable SFR, a big cable and wireless company in France, that's their biggest subsidiary, within a year they lost 1 million customers due to bad service. So this kind of information has got to be brought to the attention of those who are reviewing it, because absent conditions, the business model that the CEO of Altice brings to his acquisitions is one that is deeply, deeply troubling, that unless there is a serious review and some kind of protections, this is absolutely not a transaction which serves the public interest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
patience.
Thank you.
And our next witnesses will be part of a panel. And your group will complete our hearing.
You're going to have a tough act to follow. You just heard one of the best presenters we've heard all day.
No pictures. All right. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being patient. Your last but not least. I'm sure your testimony will be excellent. Why don't you identify yourselves and present your testimony, and then we'll proceed. We'll deal with it after that. Jerry, do you want to go first?
Thank
Why don't
you.
you all identify yourselves first?
Okay, I'm Gerald Norlander. I'm of counsel to the Public Utility Law Project of New York.
I'm Susan Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause New York, and I am representing as one of the founding organizations the Connect New York Coalition today.
Hi, I'm Michael Santorelli, Director of the Advanced Communications Law and Policy Institute at New York Law School.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Leo Asen, AARP, New York State President.
Rob Heverly, I'm a faculty member at Albany Law School.
Hi.
Yurtis Lynn Blandford, a citizen and worker in the nonprofit industry.
Okay.
Citizen?
Citizen. Ooh.
Imagine, what an idea. We're so glad she was able to join us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and other members of the committee. From hearing the testimony earlier of the telecom industry panel, one must certainly recognize the great advances that have occurred in telecommunications. But I would submit that we could have an even more amazing industry and more glorious achievements and more fabulous results if we paid attention to some basics such as universal service, affordability, customer protection, and service quality. And I think that we have a prepared statement here that I will not read to you in the interest of time, but I would like to address the notion that the advent of competition means that we should abandon the precepts of utility regulation that have served us and served the country well for 100 years. The fact that something is 100 years or even 70 years old and should be scrapped is something that personally is troubling as a 70-plus person. And second, some of the old-timers had it right, like Cardozo, who said in the absence of statute, these utilities would have the duty to serve everybody without discrimination at reasonable rates because they are using the public streets and highways. They have the right to take our property, to use the public streets, to take private property under the Transportation Corporations Law, and they exercise that right to install the lines that they now say should be deregulated completely. For example, concrete example, Verizon routinely petitions the Public Service Commission for access to buildings. We heard a little bit about that today, and they said that apparently there are some landlords who have committed to other video providers or something and are giving Verizon trouble getting in for FiOS. In their petitions to access the buildings for FiOS, Verizon invokes its powers as a telephone corporation under the Transportation Corporations Law. And that gives it the power to get easements and to get the power to enter upon public property and so forth. So they're using their powers as a phone company to install lines that are going to be used for, among other things, telephone service. And so it is that public use, that public power that they have that brings them, that confers the duty to serve to everybody. And what is it that the companies are trying to do is to take the advent of new service platforms, new technologies, and hollow out the old regulated sphere and migrate the service and the customers to a new platform that will be deregulated as to profit, deregulated as to capital investment decisions, deregulated as to service quality, deregulated as to price. And the notion that the existence of multiple providers means that you should abandon the regulation just doesn't hold up historically. It doesn't hold up in practice. Historically, the public service law was enacted when there were many utility companies providing the same type of service, for example, electricity. Also, there's an old situation where the utility provides a new service over an existing utility line. The new service should be made available to all. And there are some old cases on that go back a long time. And so it actually happened when Edison had been providing lighting service and then started to provide service for motors. And someone came in and asked for electric service for their motors. And Edison said, no, we don't want to serve you. And we don't have to because, we're an electric lighting company and we only provide lighting service. And the analogy, of course, is that we're providing a new service, broadband, and we don't have to provide DSL out in North Greenbush where I live because we don't want to. Well, the court said, well, you might not have had to provide that service, but you had the duty to serve everybody once you started doing it over the line. So some of the old common law principles, some of the old statutory provisions made a lot of sense then, and they still do today. That broadband has become so important. It should be treated as a utility service, and we should be concerned when it's not available to all. The notion that existence of competition means you don't have to regulate is really conceptually wrong. It may be you don't have to do so much price regulation. If competition is holding price down, that may be the case. But all the providers should be providing service on the same platform with the same service quality and customer service standards. We have a clear case of that. The difference between telephone service provided over cable lines, what they call VoIP service, has generally been exempted from the consumer protection and billing protections, which means that some cable companies will shut off the phone service if you're late on paying the bill for the TV, when under the billing and collection rules for phone service, they should be offering to continue the phone service with a partial payment to cover that. Similarly, the notice of termination, the right to get deferred payment plans and so forth, and Lifeline service have not been made available to all cable customers. To its credit, Time Warner came forward a couple of years back and confessed that it is indeed a telephone company and it is providing telephone service, and it would comply with the customer service rules. All the companies, however, don't do that. The commission said, well, Time Warner looked in the mirror and saw itself as a phone company, and that's fine, and we'll apply the law and let them choose their regulatory regime. Well, Comcast and Cablevision and the other companies still go along providing with a kind of service that allows the cutoff of people. So what do we have as a result of all this competition on universal service for voice? Our penetration of telephone service in this state has sunk. We're in the bottom rankings of states with West Virginia and other states that have historically been low in telephone service penetration, and we've sunk since in the last decade. And why? I think because one of it may be affordability, and the other may be the customer protections, that we put people into these bundles that they can't afford. When they get a big electric bill from Con Ed, something's got to give, and it will be the telephone service that suffers. And so we've seen an increase in the number of households in the state that don't have even voice phone service of any kind, wireless or or wireline. With respect to broadband, we have low penetration rates, and we have no real competition in most parts of the state. We have, I live within sight of this building. I have one broadband provider, which would be Time Warner, Verizon has never offered even DSL in that area. So that effectively we've seen market division among duopolists or oligopolists if you consider wireless as a competitor for some of the services. And so even if one believed that competition would be an excuse not to regulate, we don't have the kind of competition that would meet that test. Similarly, we have situations in the northern part of the state. You look up on Lake George, there's a lovely little hamlet called Hague with several hundred people. It's got a little town beach. People come in from the camping islands. They can't make a cell call because their provider isn't connected. You can't go to a restaurant and jump onto the Wi-Fi because there's no cable service there. Verizon has not installed even DSL, so that the merchants, the restaurants, nobody can have it. There's not even a payphone there anymore at the town beach. So that I think one could argue that telecom service, at least in that part of the state, and I don't think it's unusual, has been degraded in the last decade with the laissez-faire type approach of letting the companies decide where they'll put the money. One of the real changes in the last decade has been the growth of the holding companies. And I think that's a big problem. When a holding company has operations in many states and perhaps countries, and they have a certain amount of capital to allocate, they may allocate it in ways that are not beneficial to New York, either because we're a high-cost state, as was discussed earlier, or because even though it might be profitable, one could earn a utility-type rate of return in extending service another mile and picking up another 20 customers. That expense to extend a mile might be better spent, from the company's point of view, in another state or another country. So it is very important for us to not let go of the concerns over universal service and affordability. On the affordability issue, there's a problem with the low-income rate in New York State. That the Commission has been devising low-income rate programs that differ from utility to utility and company to company. So the classic telephone lifeline standard for assistance is a good one. It's one we supported. We were, New York in the 1990s was a pioneer in lifeline, and much of the federal program took some of its points from us, but we've slipped since then. And in that program, everybody who's on TANF, Safety Net, SSI, Home Energy Assistance Program, school lunch, need-based veterans benefits, and Medicaid would get the telephone lifeline. And they could prove their eligibility by any one of those means. And that should be the same standard for all of the utility discounts cross industries, so that one could go to to Keyspan and say, here's my telephone lifeline, I'm on it, it's certified, and they could enroll you if you're not caught into some other more automatic enrollment process. Instead, we have a mishmash of eligibility standards. It really makes little sense. Also, a reference to the Lifeline program, the Commission with Verizon devised a service quality measurement plan that looks to how they serve core customers. Most of the core customers are Lifeline customers. In the most recent, in the last year or so, Verizon stopped certifying or recertifying people on its own and instead outsourced it to the Universal Service Corporation, which administers the federal FCC Lifeline program. And they sent out letters to people who may have read only Chinese, and they got an envelope from USAC, and which either they couldn't read or didn't realize it affected their phone service. Verizon lost 50,000 of its Lifeline customers, about half of the Lifeline customers. Upon that base is the service quality is measured. So all of a sudden, the number of people that they had to be on time with and provide good service to shrank by 50%. So I would like to conclude unless you have some questions. I think other folks need to speak.
All right, thank you.
I'm happy to go next.
Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Identify yourself, please.
I'm sorry. Leo Asen, AARP, New York State President. Good afternoon, Assemblyman Brennan, Assemblyman Schimminger, and Assemblyman Otis.
Why don't you pull your mic closer to you?
Is that better?
Speak.
Okay. AARP is a membership organization with almost 2.6 million members in New York State. Our members, we serve members that are age 50 and above. In the interest of time, I'd like to kind of get to the bottom line. If I may, you have more detailed testimony. So let me just proceed as quickly as I can. So we agree with the FCC in its statement that broadband has gone from being a luxury to being a necessity for full participation in our economy and society. I think there are so many instances where broadband is a valuable addition. Certainly, we heard a lot of it today from some of the questions of your colleagues, and certainly in health services, access to government services, quality of life, caregiving services, the use of new healthcare technologies in the home like telehealth. I mean, there's so many instances where broadband is essential. And what's important to us is competition, affordability, and access. And those are certainly very important concerns that we have, and we've heard a lot of discussion today around those topics. With that said, we maintain our position that the PSC should issue an order creating a formal proceeding to consider the methods, technologies, policies, and impacts on the public of New York's telecommunications system, with specific reference to Commission decisions regarding deregulation of service. We believe this proceeding should address factual matters upon which policies are based, the broad functionality and impacts of the system and its governing policies. We believe a thorough, transparent, and formal proceeding is needed to assess first the status and condition of the system, especially with respect to the assumptions and findings upon which the Commission has relied in its various reforms of the system over the past 20 years, and secondly, consequences of deregulation on consumers, whether they're consistent with the law and policy goals of the Commission, and what, if any, course corrections are needed. The Commission should use the results of such an examination of the effects of deregulation on telecommunications services in New York to either reaffirm or change its policies to ensure that New Yorkers enjoy the finest, affordable, universal, reliable, and high-quality telecommunications system in the nation. In addition, at the conclusion of this evidentiary proceeding, the information would also inform the state legislature on the state of our deregulation and what role you as legislators might play to enhance access to affordable and high-quality broadband and telephone service in our state to all. And thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I know this was rather abbreviated, but in the interest of time, I wanted to bottom line it.
No, it's much appreciated. Thank you.
Sure.
Susan?
So, thank you very much.
Identify yourself and then...
I'm Susan Lerner, Executive Director of Common Cause New York, and I'm also testifying today on behalf of the Connect New York Coalition, a coalition of 17 major consumer, good government, and labor organizations, and a bipartisan group of 75 elected officials, which has filed a petition with the PSC seeking a complete and public review of New York's telephone and telecommunications system. As you know, Common Cause is a national organization, and we have a media and democracy project because in the 21st century, communications are the lifeblood of our democracy. Unfortunately, years of bad, industry-friendly decisions by regulators have not provided Americans with the reliable and affordable high-speed internet and telephone services which they want and need to function as full and effective members of today's society. Sadly, New York is no exception to that distressing national pattern. At Common Cause over the last year, we have been surveying our members on two different issues. We surveyed our members in New York City regarding the FiOS build-out, and we held a series of forums in 4 boroughs to hear directly from consumers what their experiences had been. We also have surveyed our members statewide regarding their experience with telecommunications in general. And what we have learned from them very much supports our strong support for a full, open, evidentiary hearing in front of the PSC in order to test the assumptions which led the PSC approximately 20 years ago to voluntarily loosen regulation of telecommunications with the idea that the marketplace would basically provide affordable universal service more efficiently than regulation. What we learned from our members and what we believe the PSC heard from the individuals who testified at hearings this past summer is that the marketplace has failed New Yorkers. As I was sitting and listening to the industry panel, large number of alleged competitors, I felt I was in an alternative universe, because when I compared it to what our members were telling us their experience was, the lack of service, the high cost, the inability to get broadband, because broadband was something which the industry panel was talking about. If it isn't DSL, it's broadband. Well, no, that's not the case. Broadband has now been defined by the FCC as 25 megabytes and above, and we had service providers here saying, well, you know, our basic service is 6 to 12 megabytes. That's not broadband. So the companies are not providing the service which New Yorkers and Americans need and expect. And it's a wonderment to me that a country like Bulgaria can provide internet service which is many, many times faster than our internet service at a third of the cost. And it seems to me if Bulgaria can do it, then certainly New York and the United States ought to be able to keep up with the Bulgarian standard. So something has gone wrong in the marketplace. And that is why we so strongly support our efforts with the Connect New York coalition.
The Balkans have traditionally been very progressive.
And I think that they have set a good standard. I'm not suggesting that we do worse. I'm suggesting we can do as well, because they are a good model for us. So we have provided a detailed document separately about the results of our survey, and I'm not going to review what we found through our surveys or read any of the comments that our members have provided us, but I hope that you will review them yourselves, because they are a stark example of how the marketplace has failed New York's consumers. So today I'd like to focus testimony on the positions and concerns of the coalition. We're pleased that today's hearing is taking place, as we believe that the legislature has a vital and important dual role regarding the topic of today's hearing. The legislature is responsible not only for setting legislative policy regarding telecommunications in our state, but it's also responsible for oversight of the Public Service Commission. The Connect New York Coalition urges you to be particularly vigilant in exercising that oversight responsibility as it regards the PSC's regulatory activities in the telecom area. As I've said previously, telecom is absolutely essential for economic development throughout the state and for the ability of nonprofit organizations, colleges, hospitals, libraries, and schools to function, as well as individuals and the ability of business to flourish. In determining to deregulate the telecommunications marketplace 20 years ago, the PSC promised regular factual inquiries and a re-examination of the assumptions underlying its deregulatory decision based on the actual experience of consumers, but no such review has taken place. The PSC promised to deliver a detailed study of the telecommunications marketplace to the legislative leaders in a side letter in 2013, and they promised that that detailed review and report would be provided to the legislature by March of 2014. Now, almost 2 years later, no such report has been presented. In July 2014, our Coalition filed a petition with the PSC which seeks a formal adversarial proceeding in which the PSC would gather evidence from parties and allow for cross-examination and consider counter-evidence. Our petition remains essentially unanswered. The petition specifically asks to develop facts which would answer many of the questions which have been posed to both the PSC and the industry. I'm not going to detail all of them. It's in my written testimony, but we have certain topics that we have asked the PSC to address. The inadequacy of the commission-defined required basic services, changes in regulatory practice that have diminished public awareness and public participation and have led to deterioration of service and increased cost, deterioration of the quality of service, deterioration of the physical infrastructure, misallocation of costs among Verizon subsidiaries leading to excessive rates, and systematic failure of the availability of competitive broadband services. We've been pushing the PSC to address these issues through an objective, public, adversarial proceeding because we believe that evidence is necessary to really determine what the current system's performance and shortcomings are, because as I think some of the earlier testimony points out, what industry is saying is contradictory, and it certainly contradicts the experiences of consumers. And we believe that the Commission's policy should be adjusted to actually reflect the reality rather than the hope of what the marketplace will achieve. The experiences of our members, as well as the experience of the members of other groups in the coalition and of the constituents of the elected officials who've joined the coalition, make it very clear that such a detailed, formal, factual examination is long past due. So we were quite pleased this morning that the PSC announced that it would start the process of a more formal review with the technical proceedings, which it plans to conduct in February. But again, these are only the first step. It's not the full public evidentiary hearing which we have been asked for. We look forward to continuing to work with the PSC. We certainly, at Common Cause and our coalition partners in the coalition, will be actively involved in the technical hearings to ensure that as much information as possible is obtained. But certainly we look forward to working with the PSC to ensure an open, public, thorough, and objective review of New York's telephone and telecommunications system. But we do believe that the committees convening today's hearings need to step in and ensure that the PSC lives up to its promises to the legislature and to the coalition, that its basic statutory obligation to protect consumers and to ensure that all New Yorkers have access to affordable, reliable, universal telecom service is not lost in the industry's desire to protect individual companies' competitive positions. Most importantly, your oversight is needed to ensure that the PSC lives up to its mandate to use its statutory powers to administer the state's telecom system and to ensure high quality and technologically advanced service. We are delighted to work with you further. We do obviously believe that the regulatory system needs adjustment, and we believe that your oversight of the PSC is welcome and absolutely necessary. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to go.